There is an attitude today that is just sopping in skepticism regarding religion. I mean, movements involving secularism, naturalism, humanism, atheism, freethinkerism, all these isms, they seem very much, well, they are very much opposed to organized religion. And probably with good reason, too. I mean, we've witnessed throughout the ages just countless abuses of priesthood power and those who would use their theological positions as warrants for cruelty. And it's not right, it's not good. Something needs to change with that. But in spite of all those abuses, if we're looking at it logically, we still cannot, however great the temptation is, existentially generalize all particular cases of abuse as then somehow being a valid inference for the conclusion that all religious power has been or still is being abused. Even though that's what many disillusioned people still like to do today. I mean, people are so fed up, so sick to death of religion that they then feel the need to have to vomit all of those frustrations up online or in books. And I actually believe that's part of the healing process. It's good to be able to get those types of venomous emotions out. And then it becomes the charge of the religious to uphold their baptismal covenant and to mourn with those who mourn, to wrestle with those who are experiencing painful, distressing realities and want answers to. But the next argument that I've heard that tries to dilute the issue is that those who subscribe to a set of religious precepts, they're just being brainwashed. They're being conditioned. They're being told what to do. They're being lied to by the so-called cardinal powers that be in order for them to continue to kind of gluttonize themselves over the labors and the tithe dollars of their congregation. And while I don't for a moment deny that those particular cases exist and happen, I can also say from my personal experience within the LDS Church, within the LDS community, that just hasn't been my experience. In fact, my experience, it follows more along the lines of what Aspat, who tumbles here, finds in traditional Christianity. He posted a quote a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a week ago, that said something to the effect that in spite of all the abuses propagated by the church, in spite of all those abuses, a person can still see beauty in the story. They can grasp a vision of what the story is meant to inspire in them. And it's meant to inspire the best things in a person. So that means that when we screw up and when we make mistakes, there's still room for forgiveness and grace and mercy and the ability to start over again and just get things right. Now, I will say that from time to time, I have a hard time with that condescending, sneering attitude that usually comes from outsiders that subtly poke and jibe, telling me that my LDS faith is based on nothing other than someone else telling me what to do or telling me how to believe. As if to suggest I was now suddenly stripped of my capacity to think and was just reduced to a squabbling, robotic parrot. Sure, maybe when I was younger, when I was 14 and more ignorant and scared and, stupidly dogmatic, sure, I blindly obeyed. But there came a point in my life when I was no longer able to live off of borrowed light. I no longer felt comfortable using those phlegmatic, idiomatic, groupthink type expressions that so many in my congregation were using, and still use sometimes still today. And I felt alone for a long time. I felt alienated, I felt dejected, I felt like a heretic. And still, sometimes today, still feel that way at church. But then I ask myself the question, why is it that I continue to go to church? Is it because my parents just raised me that way? It's more comfortable, more convenient? Or is there something more to it? Is there something that I wasn't discerning that was going on behind the so-called Wizard of Oz curtain? And so I took to praying a lot. meditating, studying, and not just from the standard canonical works, but really schooling and learning and being invested in deep thought and questioning everything relentlessly. I mean, I really took to heart the counsel of certain LDS prophets like Brigham Young and Hugh B. Brown, heroes of mine who taught me never to accept anything as true just because it's delivered from a pulpit or printed in the scriptural page. No, I exacerbated my seminary and institute professors. I wasn't about to recklessly turn over my eternal destiny into the hands of those who were proclaiming to teach me what they thought was the truth, or because that they were telling me what was true. I had to learn it for myself. I had to swim through the metaphysical quicksand. I had to partake of the forbidden fruit, often by the handfuls, in order to learn that, from my own saddening experience, some lifestyles are just not as conducive to happiness as others. And I actually learned a secret. I discovered something, and this is a secret that I think few intellectuals will appreciate. And that is this, is that if you are a real seeker of truth, like a sincere, honest, you want to know what is true, and if you want to determine the veracity of, say, a particular claim inside the LDS Church, the trick is not to get disillusioned by the so-called lack of objective evidences. I see this time and time again. People get so hung up on some of the most just objectively futile aspects of the gospel, such as the so-called dearth of archaeological evidences for the Book of Mormon, or that there is no scientific way to prove if Joseph Smith really saw God the Father and Jesus. Or people get caught up on pointing out instances in the LDS Church's imperfect past as being racist and polygamist and sexist, as if those instances then somehow provide proof for the Church's wholesale corruption. You know, people get so caught up in these slippery trappings, these stumbling blocks, that meanwhile they forget that the Church is still a living, breathing, evolving organism. And by living we mean it is open to revelation. The heavens are not closed, but the Church is open to continuing revelation. And by revelation we mean it is open to amendment, and sometimes harsh and embarrassing amendment in light of new information. The Church and its people are in a sense still repenting. You know, does Mormonism have its ugly side? You better believe it does. But then again, the Church never proclaimed to be perfect or infallible. The Church is merely a vehicle wherein we learn to love and serve others in spite of their imperfections. And when you do that, when you forego the impulse, when you forego the temptation to focus wholeheartedly on the dirt and the sordid and the ugliness, you allow for a special kind of humility to enter your life and change you in positive, transformative ways. Now again, the trick is not to get so hung up or drugged up on these objective evidences, these logical proofs, these elaborate theorems, because when you do all that, you completely sideswipe, you undercut, amputate the far more pressing concern. And that is the concern that involves the question, how shall I live this day? And that is a question that, at its core, is heavily saturated in the primal, subjective, existential aspect of the gospel. And what aspect is that? It is the aspect of how the story of the gospel changes your heart. It changes the way that you treat people, the way that you want to treat people. And it's spiritually discerned in nature. Now, you might think that that's a cop-out that I say it like that. It's like, oh, it can only be spiritually discerned. Okay, what does that word spiritual even mean? I'm mincing, I'm playing with words. Well, then take psychedelics, for instance. Psychedelic drugs, like religious experience, they really hold no real meaning to the man or woman who stands outside of their existential influence. These are experiences which are so, in some sense, beyond description, ineffable. You can't just transfer it to someone else wholeheartedly. Someone actually has to enter in upon those experiences. Kierkegaard, he understood this principle really well. It was Kierkegaard who taught that unless a man or a woman takes upon themselves a deeply subjective study and practice of the so-called Christian paradoxes, that unless they do that, they will forever stand outside with eyes looking in upon what they perceive to be something scary and occultish, and ruled maybe by otherworldly forces and agencies. But once you have taken upon yourself the study of those paradoxes, and you can sense that it's not just contradiction, they're paradoxes. They're seemingly contradictions which upon closer examination actually find harmonies. Once you've done that, you will see that from the first vision, Joseph Smith's account of the first vision, unfolded a story. And this is a story that you and I are invited to enter into and be transformed by. And once we have been transformed by it, we will know it. And we will say that we know it. Because we will then begin to enact the works of love, which in turn will create the empiricist criterion for showing others, or at least suggesting to their minds that, maybe after all, the work is indeed divine, but only when it is truly practiced. How did Jesus put it? By their fruits ye shall know them. And as I indicated on a previous blog that I wrote on organized religion, this is actually adapted from Eugene, England. But I say the following, I said, the attitude has far too long been, what has religion done for me? Or, I can't believe without scientific evidence. If we constantly approach religion as consumers, refuse to accept its opportunities for service and self-challenge, neglect the central theme of helping our neighbors as ourselves, and negate the active responsibility we have to co-author the meaning of how scriptures apply to us, then we will never partake of organized religion's sweet and filling fruit.